Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where we put our property experts to task answering your property related questions. And joining me today is Ben Richards, MD of Aura Architecture and Interiors.
Hello.
Welcome to you, Ben. Good to have you back. Joining Ben is Finbarr Doyle, MD of P4HB Procurement for House Builders. Welcome to you, Finbarr.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you back too. Okay, well, Finbarr, you're going first. Your
Okay.
question is this. We've heard much about rising prices limiting construction of new homes. Are prices now settling, or will we have another year or more of rising material costs?
2023 saw 2023 to 24 saw an average price increase of up to 8% on materials, driven mainly by concrete, insulation, blocks, bricks, the usual suspects. And I think that's driven by the ongoing conflicts that are happening, financial market uncertainty, and also there is an increased demand now coming through since sort of May, if you look at the PMI index, etc. Going forward, I think it's all dependent on what happens with the planning that is now proposed, and whether that sees an uptake by house builders to really try and go for it. The risk is that we could see price increases exacerbated by trying to hit those targets. So there might need to be some intervention to prevent that going out of control. And there are some interventions that can be made by both manufacturing and government to try and mitigate that.
Okay, well, we're hearing all about some fantastic numbers that the government want to have built by the end of this parliamentary term. I mean, I think two questions come from that. Have we got enough materials to sort of do that number of developments? And do we have the workforce to do it as well?
The short answer is that I don't think we're going to build £1.5 million homes in the next 5 years, or what's been mooted as a sort of a top sort of level of 370 units a year. That's twice as many as we built last year. The supply chain ability to supply that level of build out is uncertain. I think there are things that could be taken now, steps that could be taken now to minimise the gap. Modular construction is something that is certainly been mooted, but it isn't really there yet for a few reasons. And I think also I think manufacturers need to see more detail through the consultation to know whether they should be, building reserves, investing in their capacities, etc. And that takes a lot of time as well. So there's that. And the short answer on labour is no, we don't. The risk we run is in trying to attract people into construction. That takes 3 years to go through apprenticeships.
I say it must be a 3 or 4 year cycle, mustn't it, to get somebody to be competent in what they're doing?
Yes, and the risk you run is if you're heading, trying to hit a number, do you have workers who aren't completely skilled in their area, which has all sorts of consequences, both in terms of the quality of the work that they do and the quality of the built environment that they build. And that might have further, knock-on effects down the line, the unintended sort of consequence type thing.
I think one of the other things is, I always say this about the politicians, they come on in their high-vis jackets and hard hats and say, we're going to build whatever. Who's we?
It's not they, isn't it?
It's certainly not they.
We don't have the we, do we? There's not enough skilled labour to deliver.
And I just always wonder, it's all right coming up with these figures, and yes, it would be lovely to build 300 and whatever thousand homes a year, but whether it can really happen or not, what do you think, Ben?
I don't think we're going to be achieving those targets. We haven't for a long, long time. With the planning system the way it is, the shortage of skilled labour and the material cost to deliver it, it's just it's a massive target to hit that will woefully be under that, unfortunately. I mean, I like the incentive and the idea of it, and it does give a bit of confidence back into the market, and the hope, sometimes that's enough to at least spur it on a little bit. Let's say they didn't aim for that, and they only aim for 300,000, we only did 200, whereas if they aim for 370, maybe we do hit 240. At least there's some incentive for us to kind of push things forward and gather momentum. But do I think we're going to hit those numbers? No.
I do like the boldness and the decisiveness which with the Labour government came out on day one and said, this is what we're going to do. So there's good intention. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it at that, shall I?
Life's full of good intention, isn't it? I've spent my life listening to good intention. Anyway, Ben, right, this is one for you, but I have a feeling that Finbarr's going to come on this too. Is the trend towards modular construction actually going to limit architectural freedom and inspirational design, or is it the way to go?
Yeah, I do like this question. I think there's a bit of a dichotomy really, whereby yes, I think it does limit kind of, if you go to any house builder's site, Taylor Wimpey, Simmons, whatever, they're not exactly the most interesting of properties. They're square boxes with roofs on, and that's fine actually, and it is the way that it needs to go because we need the quantum. When you look back at 1950s, 1960s, you look back now and think that's horrible boxes, material used are horrendous. Luckily, with the way the materials have advanced and the methods of construction that we use and the quality and the levels of insulation and all that push from sort of a building regulation and a governmental perspective, the houses that we do build today are still more robust, more thermally efficient. They do look a lot better, even if they are square boxes with windows and openings. But I think modular can look just like a more traditional build. There's plenty of ways in which we can build that you wouldn't know the difference really, whether it's I go to some sites, I don't know whether it's stick built with timber stick built or concrete, and masonry sort of cavity walls, but most of the time it's not, an inspirational type of architecture that you're building on a house building scale. When you get to urban locations like London and you're putting up skyscrapers and bigger, taller buildings, they tend to have a little bit more to them because they kind of have to.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. You made reference to the past then, and I was discussing this subject with a friend of mine up in the Midlands who was on various planning committees for many, many years. And I said, well, what do you think? And what do you think of the numbers that are being quoted? And he just emailed me back and he said, look, I agree. However, we may need a new set of rules or building regulations to go along with modular construction and new designs. I think what we don't want to do is recreate the post-war slums by rushing into developing too quickly in an attempt to just hit the numbers.
Yeah.
And he said, on the other hand, I do understand that we can't sit on our hands. So it is a dilemma, isn't it? It
is, yeah. We need the speed, and to get speed, it needs to be cheap and it needs to be easy to build. And what's easier than building a box? It's an unfortunate state of affairs, really.
It's not good for the fees, though, is it?
Yes, again,
Mr. Architect. Okay. All right. Well, Finbarr, do you want to come back on this one? I think it's within your domain, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's interesting what's happening in modular because if you look at what's happened really during post-COVID, and there was a lot of noise pre-COVID about players coming into the market and creating capacity and trying to do things in as interesting a fashion as possible. Actually, the number of modular companies out there right now has actually reduced in the last few years.
They've all gone bust.
They've all gone bust because, and there's a disconnect between, if you look at the model of modular construction, yes, it means less labour on site, but it also means more cost up front.
Well, it's the upfront cost that's killing them, isn't it?
And it almost means that, if you take LNG and why they went, had they been a contractor and had the support and the investment from maybe government to go out and create some units as a contractor, then maybe they might have survived. But they were only supplying, and they couldn't supply at a rate or at a volume or at a scale that could work for them. So I think there's some interesting dynamics there, and there maybe there needs to be some intervention by government in terms of incentives, financial investment, to really shift modular sort of gears.
Just in the last 30 seconds of this half of the show, we see a lot on TikTok and a lot of the social media sites of Chinese building complete modular buildings, and you can buy the equivalent of a sort of 350 square foot, 1-bedroom flat, fully fitted out, furnished, all the rest of it, brought over in a container for about £30,000. Mm-hmm. Ought we to be going that way too, or does that take us back to the post-war prefabs?
I've got one word: regulations.
Mm-hmm. Really, yeah. I mean, the technical housing standards, in terms of size requirements, have got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's kind of for good reason, but actually, I absolutely think there is a need and a demand for smaller, compact living, especially in urban locations like this, that could work really well and be more affordable.
I think Elon Musk is onto something.
With?
If you take his constituent parts, batteries offline, Starlink, he's now allegedly designing, Winnebagos that are going to come on stream in about 3 years' time. That means you can have a nomadic life that's sustainable.
Okay, well, on that happy note, we'll go to the break. So join me again after the break when I'll be asking Ben and Finbarr more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm joined by Ben Richards and Finbarr Doyle. Welcome back, guys. Yeah. Finbarr, are many UK developers switching to construction of modular homes to speed up production?
In short, I don't think so. There's a real incentive for them to do so because of the lack of skilled workers in construction. But I think there's a disconnect between looking at modular construction as a solution to build out a house, particularly if you're a smaller developer. I think really you'd need to be thinking about changing how you go about your business fundamentally in order to adopt it, and I don't see enough of that happening.
Okay, is that because of the finance?
Well, I think it's the finance and the funding, and I think the structure of funding is such that actually it's about minimising cost through the chain, or at least managing costs through the chain, and we get involved in that. But I don't know any investor or funder who's willing to take all of the upfront risk on modular first and then hope it all comes back later.
I think what I'm going to do, gents, is just explain to our viewers a couple of things. I mean, one, viewers at home may not be familiar with the term modular construction, and what it means effectively is that you would have bathrooms perhaps or kitchens constructed in a completed form in a factory and then sent to your site and then craned into situ into the framework of the building. I think if you've forgiven the non-technical aspect of that, I think that's a fair enough description. The problem is that although it saves time, money, overall cost in terms of production, the difficulty is that these factories that are producing these modular units want paying for them before they leave their factory. And that means that if a developer is building, 50 units, he's got to buy 50 of these bathrooms, 50 of these kitchens, pay them all up front, probably even before he's laid a brick or two on the construction of the building. And they don't have the finance to do that. The banks won't finance it because the product remains with the factory of the manufacturers. It doesn't go onto site and therefore doesn't form part of the security. So there's a bit of an impasse about where you get the money from to do this. And that's why a number of these companies have actually got brilliant ideas, great products, but have gone bust.
Yep.
And I think, does that explain?
I think that's a really good, and if you scale that out and think about, companies that are looking at modular panels, etc., and really pushing boundaries on how far you can take modular. No matter which, how you scale it or how adventurous or ambitious your sort of ideas are, ultimately the funding is the block.
Yeah. I mean, modular in itself, I mean, can go from a very minimal sort of product up to, say, the complete room or bathroom. I mean, for instance, I mean, I still don't know why we're having tilers sitting there doing tiles and grouting everything and all the rest of it when you can just buy a sheet of tiles and bang it on the wall.
We're doing a lot of that in our sort of HMOs. You know, it's easy to maintain, it's easy to remove, easy to replace, that sort of stuff. I mean, the modular bathrooms themselves, when I used to work for the Berkeley Group, that was what we did on the big tower scheme. So you've got the frame goes up, and over in Italy, 12 months previous, you'd be buying all of these prefab bathrooms that are fully finished in a factory in Italy, shipped over onto the plate and moved into position and connected up. Amazing system, amazing quality. It just comes down to, you know, the Berkeley Group have the funds to be able to do that. And take those efficiencies.
Yes. And again, just to explain, if you're doing a sort of 30, 40, 50 story building, you budget to buy your materials as they're used on I can't remember what the car trade expression is.
Just in time.
Just in time sort of supply basis. So that's the way that goes. So it does make funding very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, unless you get that connect between modular and contractor. And I think and if there was some sort of incentive to be able to do that, then I think you can bridge some of that gap.
Yeah.
But as long as it's a supply only of a modular, completely finished, unit or product or whatever it is, they're not going to release it unless they get paid. And quite right.
So, yeah.
Quite right.
Well, Ben, what do you say about it all?
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine in St Albans who's bought a 2-unit loft modular scheme that's now 8 months delayed because the factory is too late to ship out his scheme. He's waiting for it on site. He's losing all of this rent. And on small sites, I just don't think it works, especially in London and urban areas where logistically it's difficult to get these cranes in. And
difficult enough to get a skip outside.
Exactly, yeah. So in London, you've got no hope. So I do think there's an absolute place for it. And like you say, having seen it in use, the quality is there, the speed is there. But if you haven't got your funding line sorted, it makes it so difficult. And like Finbarr says, a lot of companies have gone bust over the last couple of years. So there's clearly issues in the whole industry.
It's a shame to see progress stopped by that sort of reason, isn't it?
It is, because you take all this innovation, you take all these ideas, and you take, these were real potential solutions to solving not just the ability to build quicker, but also address the labour shortage. But it still comes back down to, I think, old mindsets. Actually, I think the funding mindset is I need to see proof now.
On the business of craning these modular rooms in, bathrooms, kitchens, or whatever, where does the skill set fall in doing this? Do you need a different sort of builder or?
I guess from a logistical perspective, it's very easy. You prepare the site and you just need to crane them in and connect them up. It's like a big Meccano set. So the skills required are very low, which is great because it doesn't need that skilled labour and anyone can do it.
Yeah.
So it is very efficient. It can be cost effective, but you've got to get those funds in place in the first place.
Okay, well, thank you. Ben, there seemed to be little about encouraging green innovation in the new government's manifesto. What is the view of architects on the future of this ever more important subject? Green or not so green?
It is green, and we're being forced down that route. And although there wasn't a big hoo-ha about it during the election and the manifestos, there's already things in place that are starting next year, for example, like the Future Home Standards. So that's coming in 2025, and that is a really big push from a building regulation perspective to use green energies, to increase the thermal efficiency of your home, to make it more airtight, to put appropriate ventilation in, all this sort of stuff. So those things are in place, and the architects that you use and all of your contractors out there will understand that. The one thing that concerns me is that developers aren't jumping on that early enough to understand the impacts, and going back to kind of build costs and resources. I don't think we're quite prepared for that change next year, which is a big step up from the current building regulations.
But I'm concerned as to where developers get the guide from on this. Clearly, government ministers aren't the experts to be guiding this. So presumably they go to various
Specialists,
consultants, and all the rest of it. But how is this information coordinated and passed on?
Yeah, how is it filtered down? I mean, I guess it is from industry professionals like us as architects, from surveyors, from evening events by RICS, by REBA, all of these government, these institutions and governing bodies of architecture and surveying and all this sort of stuff. It's for them to filter that back through the industry. And they do a good job of that, to be fair, from an insider perspective. There's plenty of opportunity to go to seminars and events.
But we've had such disasters with all this guidance, haven't we? I mean, presumably the previous government was guided to insist that all properties were going to be insulated to a certain standard, one thing or another. People even sold their portfolios because they knew they wouldn't be able to hit the targets, lost huge amounts of money, and then Mr. Sunak suddenly decided that wasn't going to do it anyway.
And they retracted it, As of yesterday, it has been announced that the Labour government are going to reintroduce that in 2030. So we now have 5 to 6 years to kind of plan for that. I mean, I think they gave 5 to 6 years initially, when it was first announced by the Tories, and even by the time the D-Day came around, nobody was really prepared.
We'll all be living in modular prefabs by then.
I mean, hopefully. I mean, the key thing that a lot of people didn't realise, and again, kind of filtering the information down, there was almost a get-out clause with that EPC requirement to get to C, whereby if you had to spend more than £3,500 to do that work, you can actually get a pass anyway. So I think a lot of people think, I need to spend loads of money on my property, but £3,500, certainly in London and the South East, is not a lot. And as long as you've proven you've spent up to that amount and can't take it any further, you were okay. So there's nuances with all of it.
Finbarr, just in the last minute or so, you're in a unique position because you're talking to developers to sell them the product, and you're talking to product suppliers to take their product in to resell. Where's the strongest leaning towards the green side of this? Is it the manufacturers or is it the developers?
That's a really good question. I think manufacturers would like to be pushing more green product. I think it's really difficult for developers because developers are relying on, obviously, the planning frameworks. I think the planning offices are under strain and are playing catch up. I mean, let's face it, there's been 3 changes to the planning framework in the last 12 months, I think. So I can't see how that's going to play catch up. So I think developers really want to adopt, but they're pulling their hair out in planning, and you've got a manufacturing base who really want to introduce these new innovative products, but actually are trying to figure out how they bring those two things together. One final point, which I think is quite interesting, is that although I read yesterday, there's 100,000 homes that are currently past planning that cannot be built for fear of getting fines on either an environmental or a water quality, passing those regulations from central government. So you've got other things happening too around trying to make these things happen.
So good luck with 1.5 million homes. Okay, well that's all we've got time for in the show. So thank you very much for watching. A big thank you to Finbarr Doyle. Thank you for coming in, Finbarr. Ben Richards, thank you again for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.